become more sensitive to financial concerns within the church and stewardship and whatnot, I propose that we altogether close the National Church Office in New York and move all those people out into the country so that we are really in touch with one another rather than having a group that is pulled up in New York passing down ideas and edicts to us. So I think we need to decentralize the church in that way.
Tom, as I'm sure you're aware, that has already begun. The Episcopal Church, in fact, has offices in Nebraska, Los Angeles. I believe the next site is Atlanta, as well as New York City, and I think I'm leaving one out.
You know, there's 39 churches in this diocese, Episcopal churches. And as I said, mine grew out of St. Paul, Centerville, because of the horse and buggy. I do have a few farmers in my congregation who have horses and wagons, but they come to church in their cars. 10 miles means nothing anymore. So Tom, picking up on what you said, we could close some churches right here in the Eastern Shore. I think sometimes what Heather was speaking about buildings, is that where our heart and soul is?
But they're back to this crisis years in which the Episcopal Church was formed, and how our Constitution, as well as our understanding of ordination, our understanding of shared communion, all those things will influence the identity of the Episcopal Church in the 21st century. And we will either be a constituent member of the worldwide communion, or we will be in another relationship, perhaps as an ecumenical partner. We won't be severed from Christian fellowship or mission or a sense of common purpose and reconciliation. All those things, I think, are very much at the heart of all Christians.
I don't know about the worldwide experience of the Anglican or the Episcopal Church, rather. I mean, the worldwide Christian movement is certainly has never been more prosperous than it is today. There are more Christians on the face of the earth today than ever could possibly have been imagined at the beginning of the last century. So the worldwide Christian movement is advancing at a remarkable pace. Whether or not the Episcopal Church is a part of that, I mean, I love the Episcopal Church, I chose it. But if it does not survive, that's still okay. What matters is the Christian church around the world. I would love for this church to be a part of it, but I have no anxiety about whether or not it survives or not. If it does, that's thrilling. If it doesn't, well, then we'll see what comes next.
What is it about the church that we're hinting at here that's not vibrant enough for not all people, but I'm talking about people who are seeking, people who are looking for a closer relationship with God? What do you feel about the church now that, why is it not more vibrant, or what more could it be doing?
Well, what I was going to say is that we need to recruit younger leaders. I mean, the average age of clergy in the Episcopal Church is probably plus 50. We need younger leaders. And we need to be about entrusting a younger generation of clergy to lead this church.
I think a lot of people in my parish would be totally in agreement with you. They are really far more interested in knowing what Emmanuel Church is going to do for the food pantry, for the Good Neighborhood Fund, for the Samaritans, and beyond Kent County for things like Episcopal Relief and Development and Habitat for Humanity. They're really a lot more interested in that than in the organizational issues within the Episcopal Church, or they call them what they are, the political issues within the Episcopal Church. I'm a midlife vocation, and so I've only been out of seminary 5 years. I served as a student trustee of the seminary where I was, and when I was on that board my last year, early in 2004, we heard a presentation from the Vice President of the Episcopal Church Foundation. They did a study a few months after the General Convention of 2003. Surveys, interviews, all that stuff, trying to figure out where people in the pews were about the sexuality issue. And they came to the conclusion that about 20% of the people in the Episcopal Church were appalled by the election and subsequent confirmation and consecration of Gene Robinson. And about 20% were absolutely delighted. And 60% of Episcopalians were in the middle. They didn't really know how they felt about it. Here's what I think now, over 6 years later, or about 6 years later, I think here's where we are. And when I say this, please do not misunderstand me. I do not for a minute mean to dismiss or make light of or trivialize the sexuality debate or act as though it's all behind us. But I think we're sort of in a similar place. I think 20% of people at the church are still very unhappy about it, 20% are still delighted about it, and 60%, I think they know where they are about on it, what they now feel about it, which is, can we please talk about something else and get on with doing something else? So.
It's occurred to me lately that that we have tended to look at the controversy over sexuality as a bad thing. And I'm along with Dan, not dismissing the struggle, the suffering that people have experienced. It's real. People have been hurt in the course of this. But in terms of relevance, I just want to address, if I were to do this over again, I would set you folks to task talking with one another. Because the collective voice of the Episcopal Church is what I believe people beyond us are going to find relevant. That is to say, the extent to which we're able to talk to each other about our lives, and not just about homosexuality. Homosexuality is one form of sexuality. There are divorced people in the room. There are single people. There are any number of different ways that people relate to one another. How well do we know each other? How well do we talk to each other? We've focused on this one kind of sexuality, but isn't there an invitation in this for us as people of faith to take the risk of talking to one another without judgment and saying, I don't understand the way you are, I don't fully understand the way I am, as one of my former bishops had said in talking about this issue when he was a candidate to be Bishop of Ohio. He said, I don't understand heterosexuality. And this is a guy with 4 kids, but I kind of got where he was coming from. But I think the real challenge is for us in terms of every one of us, our engagement with one another in ways that we may not be at this point, where we really take some risks to talk to each other about our lives. What is it like to be a committed person in a marriage for 50 years? What is it like to be a single person? What is it like to be a homosexual person in a committed relationship? How well do we know these people and know one another, what these experiences are? How important is relationship to God?
I'd like to leave you with a question that might make for an additional meeting. That is a question concerning both the denomination and the individual congregation. The management gurus that mostly talk to the corporation leaders, but sometimes also to nonprofits, tell us that an organization has to have built into it a mechanism for change, on one hand. At the same time, a way of achieving stability on the other. And usually the stability comes from your values and your beliefs. But you need to ask this question perhaps going forward is, what is the mechanism for change that's in the organization called the Episcopal Church in America? And what mechanism for change is there in your individual congregation? You may not have a mechanism for change. And if you don't have a mechanism for change, you may not be here 100 years from now. You may have a mechanism for change, but no solid beliefs or values, in which case you will also not be here 100 years from now. So it's a nice follow-through from what we've been talking about tonight.